Well, night has fallen in the old abandoned fields again. The first really good night of the spring/summer season, which means that for the most part I'm going to be doing this at night now. The sun around here becomes too hot for me to stand outside for much too long. So, vampiric tendencies aside, I'd say that it's the perfect night for me to finish what I started, which is, of course, painting some historical orcs.
Alright, you've done that too many times. It's not funny anymore.
Now, before we get into this too much, I've already covered the history of the game and the history of the model in the last episode. But this time, I want to go into my personal history with the orcs. It all begins here, actually. Now, back in my day, 2002 or so, on the bus to middle school, a bunch of my friends would take this exact book with them and swap painting ideas. This is my first real exposure to the world of painting miniatures. I got curious, got involved in painting some wargaming miniatures like the Lord of the Rings line from Games Workshop, maybe a little bit of my grandfather's actual historical miniatures, but for the most part I'd never seen anything like Warhammer before. It's over-the-top dynamic characters, it's models with such deeply cut detail that I've never seen before anywhere else. Naturally, I tried it out. Now, I could have gone the route of trying out painting my Necrons that I had since I was 12, but that would have been too easy, right? That would have made sense. This is me we're talking about, and me as a young kid nonetheless. So I could have started with Necrons, but my first actual painting was done on orcs and goblins, and that's a hell of a way to start off for a rookie just learning how to paint. You see, these orcs and goblins have a lot of detail to them. They're basically more blank canvas than the Necrons are, and with all the detail cut into them, that means that there's more expected from you. So this book was where I learned most of my initial painting techniques. As you can see, there's a lot of dry brushing, a lot of inking, stuff designed to make these models look really good with a minimal amount of effort. If you don't do those techniques too often and you don't rely entirely upon them, which of course I did.
So truth be told, these models handed my ass back to me on a silver platter. Now these ones that I'm showing you right now are the exact ones that I painted from when I was 12. So truth be told, and very apparent here, I sucked. But as I went on, I learned other techniques besides just inking and dry brushing. From here onward, you can see evidence of layering, hand highlighting, picking out details, edge work, everything necessary to make the orcs really shine. And finally, in the modern day, I think I've accumulated enough skills to actually have a decent looking orc army one way or the other.
So now, as my skills have grown throughout the years and I've had more practice with orcs and goblins models, I'd say the time is finally right for me to try something like the historical 2nd edition orc model. We'll give this a try, but it's a totally different animal than what I'm used to. These 3rd edition holdovers, they're detailed on their own, they're grimdark, they look intense, they're actually bigger than the 2nd edition model, they don't look as cartoony. This new model is going to force me to adapt in a way that I have not painted before. So this experiment is just as much novel stuff for me as it is for some of you. At least those of you in my audience who aren't old Hammer geeks, which I know there are quite a few of you. So bear with me on my journey to paint a 2nd edition orc.
So we're going to start off with a black undercoat here, predominantly because I want to paint this in the goth fashion. So the Goths, of course, have a root color of black, which means most of the armor is going to be black. Most of the weaponry is going to have black underlayers. So all I'm doing is going to dry brush some dark gray up over that. That'll stop the black from looking too shiny.
I'm well aware that maybe goth colors weren't exactly the traditional choice for this model. After all, it is so cartoony. Perhaps Bad Moons or Evil Suns or even Death Skulls would have been better. This black color scheme is not as cartoony as it could be, but that's precisely why I'm using it. I don't like the cartoony look on this model, and I want to see if a paint scheme can kind of bring it back into the realm of realism just a little bit. bring in that terror that the model seems to be missing. I don't know if it can, but hey, if you don't try, you will never find out.
So the next thing I'm going to be doing is taking all the brown bits like leather, horn, wood, and giving them the base coat of brown. This is an easy color to layer up from, of course, and it's what I'll be doing later with a little bit of dry brushing. Yeah, my favorite technique, dry brushing, but more on that later. The finished product should look like this. So I'm going to take this highlight shade right here, get that all on my brush, and dry brush all the brown bits you see here. Yeah, nice and easy for this part of things. So then I'm going to take that shade and brush it all up over the wood, the leather, and the horn, but I'm going to do it in various amounts of thickness, spending more time on the horns and the leather than I do on the wood. Like, that wood is just supposed to have a texture to it, nothing too fancy, but those horns, I don't want them to stay brown. I want them to get up to a bone color like what I've got here. And then I'll take some white mixed with bone color and highlight those very horns later. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reach in and take the metal bits of this armor and kind of base coat it with that Necron technique that I keep using. Now, it's supposed to look even dingier than usual in this case because we're dealing with orcs. Orcs are notorious for stealing things, taking things that is ill-fitting. In other words, just looting stuff because... It's that time again. It's time to paint orc flesh. Yeah, if I'm being honest, orc flesh is what gives me the hugest ass kicking out of all of the painting jobs I've done. I've tried so many different versions of orc flesh, but I find that this one works the best. Basically just base coating with a highlight shade of green. And then, once that's done, I'll just dry brush around everything else, just to get it out of the way before I start the real intricate stuff with the skin. In other words, I'm stalling for time here. I really don't want to do that skin. Inevitabilities aside, this will just get those metal bits on the front looking like they're supposed to. Nice and shiny and scuffed all at the same time. Look at that Imperial bolter. It's just silly. But hey, we work with what we're given. The very next thing that I'm going to do is get those little edges around the armor painted red and... oh, fuck. I miscolored it. Well, time to do some cleanup. The worst part is that was just one stud. It's so hard to get a good angle on this thing. I can barely imagine line highlighting it. But that's just what I have to do. Look at the intricacy I have to work with here. This brush is basically the smallest that I have, and I'm still smearing that red paint all over the armor like some kind of deranged man trying to wear his mother's lipstick. This is just so messed up I can't even begin to describe it. And there's no room to work here. That's one piece I'm dealing with. There's no way I could have assembled this differently to make it easier to paint. It's just restricting my movement space. I can't imagine a newbie trying to paint this. Well, at least it's onto an easy part now. This green shade, I'm going to use this to darken the recesses in the flesh, because right now it's way too bright. This will give it a nice orky shade instead of that sickly Death Guard shade. Just look at what I'm about to do here. Get a nice thick coat of that on the brush, and then focusing on the recessed areas of the hands, arms, face. It's just going to seep into the cracks and make it all nice and distinct. The face here, this is what I was originally intending to do with most of my orc models. I could leave it like this. After all, it does look kind of cool, but I'm feeling a bit more ambitious than that.
I gotta be honest with you guys, I was so hoping this would be a model where I could actually get away with dry brushing a lot of stuff because of the dark color scheme, because of the more basic style of model. I was hoping I could just ink the features, leave it at that, and kind of leave well enough alone, make it passable. But I've come too far in my painting. I can't stop here. It doesn't look good enough for my standards. Even so, I was kind of hoping to avoid using too much hand highlighting.
The trouble is, on this kind of model, you need hand highlighting in your repertoire more than ever. There's no other way to make these features distinct. This face, for example, it had no detail. Everything that you're going to see from this point out, I've done by hand highlighting. The lips, the eyebrows, the upper lip, the jawbone, it's all hand highlight. And to make matters worse, I still have to go into the hands, and where I could ordinarily dry brush a hand, on this model, I have to highlight every individual knuckle and finger distinct from one another. It's a pain in the ass. And of course then I have to go back to the face and highlight that with a brighter shade of green too. Not just the eyebrows and the nose, but also that upper lip that I hate so much, and later on, the ears. Yeah, bet you forgot about those things because they're lurking so far back on the miniature, almost flat against the armor as if they were part of it. That's just stupid. And to make matters even worse, this product right here, this is what I would just consider the base coat of this miniature. We're not even close to done.
This confuses me to no end. I mean, this is supposed to be a starter model from only the second edition of the game. You'd think that you'd want to take it easy on new hobbyists, new painters, but instead, you basically hand them the smackdown and demand perfection right off the bat. Tell me that's fair in any capacity whatsoever to the guy who just wants to get his miniatures done and have them look okay, even remotely okay.
Okay, break's over. Back to the highlighting. This whole next part is just going to be an endurance marathon of hand highlighting. No way to do it but to do it. And I'm skating on thin ice here, just with the smallest brush I have already being frayed, my hands shaking in anticipation, and me having such little space to work with. So I hope you're kind of appreciating what I've got so far. Alright, final leg of things. I can smell victory within my grasp. All that remains now is the detail work. I'm trying to do some checkers on this orc's pauldron. Once more, that axe haft is getting in the way of my brush. I've got to readjust my angle and come back for it at a different side. I don't know how I'm going to do that though. Maybe upside down, maybe sideways. I'll figure it out and I'll clean it up in a bit. That's got to be my major complaint with this model. It just gives you so little room to adjust course. There's no margin for error, and there's not a whole lot you can do to prevent the paint from just building up and stopping your cleanup dead in its tracks. You almost have to be perfect on the first try, and if you're not, there's something akin to a penalty waiting on the other side of that brush for you. You may have noticed it already, but on his back, there's a little bit of a raised lump where the previous owner had already painted over it too much. So that distorts the texture, distorts the model, and makes dry brushing, highlighting, everything like that even more of a pain than it already is. I don't want to have to deal with that if I can help it. Okay, so we went from having an orc that looks a little something like this to looking like this. It's an improvement, I'll give it that. Oh boy, another goth boy for my kill team. I can't wait to put this alongside my other badass goths and see how cool it looks with them. Oh no.
So, did the paint scheme that I used, namely the 3rd edition's goth paint scheme, really add a bit more terror or seriousness back into the comedy? I'll let you guys be the judge of that. Next time though, I'm not going to do another Greenskin. I'm not going to do another Necron. We've seen the dark side of the galaxy. It's time to venture towards the light. So I look forward to seeing you guys next time when we address the Eldar.